The knock came a little after midnight, soft enough that I almost missed it under the voice coming through my headphones. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a half-empty mug of coffee gone cold, editing a breakup podcast for a woman who had spent 43 minutes explaining why her fiancé had cried harder about losing the venue deposit than losing her. That was the strange part of my job. I made other people's heartbreak sound clean. I cut out mouth clicks, balanced room tone, softened ugly pauses, and made strangers sound braver than they probably felt when they recorded. My name is Miles Avery. I was 34 years old, and most nights I lived inside other people's confessions while my own apartment stayed quiet enough to hear the elevator complain through the wall. So when the knock came again, slightly harder this time, I took off my headphones expecting a wrong door delivery, a neighbor locked out, or Mrs. Delaney from 4B needing help with her smoke alarm again. I did not expect Nora Whitaker standing in my hallway in a pale champagne dress, one hand braced against the doorframe, her engagement ring catching the yellow light like something that had survived a fire. For a second, neither of us said anything. Nora lived 2 doors down, apartment 5C, the one with the tiny wreaths that changed by season, and the expensive paper samples always stacked outside her door in flat white boxes. She designed wedding invitations for a living, which meant she spent her days making other people's promises look elegant enough to frame. I had known her for almost 11 months in the way neighbors know each other when both of them are too tired to pretend they have normal schedules. We had shared elevator rides, borrowed a screwdriver once, argued politely over whether the building laundry room was haunted, and nodded at each other through rain-streaked windows at the coffee shop downstairs. I knew she laughed with one shoulder first when she was genuinely amused. I knew she worked late before big client deadlines. I knew she was engaged to a man named Graham Caldwell because his voice carried in the hallway, all smooth certainty and polished patience, the kind of voice men use when they think being calm makes them right. What I did not know was why Nora looked like she had walked out of a photograph someone had torn in half. I said her name before I could think of anything useful, and she gave me a small, ruined smile, like she appreciated that I had chosen the safest possible word. Her makeup was still mostly perfect, which somehow made it worse. The mascara had not run, the lipstick had not smeared, her hair was still pinned up with little pearl clips, but the woman inside all that careful beauty looked like she had stepped away from a crowded room and forgotten how to breathe. I asked if she was okay, which was a stupid question, but sometimes stupid questions are the only ones gentle enough to open a door. Nora looked past my shoulder into the apartment, at the kitchen table covered with audio notes, the old coffee machine with its cracked plastic lid, the hoodie thrown over the back of a chair, and then back at me. She said the engagement party ended early. I tried not to look at the ring. I failed. When I asked where Graham was, she blinked once, slow and controlled, and told me he was probably still explaining to both families why he needed time to be sure. I felt something in me go cold in a very calm way. I had never liked Graham, but I had never had the right to dislike him out loud. He wore navy coats that fit too well, and spoke to doormen by name without ever really seeing their faces. The few times I had passed him in the hall, he had looked at me with polite confusion, like he knew I belonged in the building but could not remember what category. Nora, though, he always touched lightly in public, hand at her back, fingers at her wrist, little gestures that looked romantic until you noticed they also steered. I moved aside and told her to come in before the hallway, decided to become a witness. She hesitated only once, and that hesitation did something dangerous to me because it meant she had thought about this before knocking. Then she stepped into my apartment, bringing with her the smell of rain, expensive perfume, and whatever was left of a night that had been decorated to look like forever. I did what men like me do when emotions are too large for the room. I got practical. I closed the door, cleared a pile of sound cables off the second chair, offered water, then tissues, then immediately regretted offering tissues because Nora's chin lifted like she had been holding herself together with one pin, and I had almost touched it. She said she was not going to fall apart, and I told her I had not accused her of it. That got the smallest breath of a laugh, not happy, barely alive, but real enough that I held on to it. My coffee machine chose that moment to cough itself awake because I had bumped the switch with my elbow, grinding and sputtering like a tugboat losing a fight with the harbor. Nora looked at it, then at me. and said she had wondered for months what that terrible sound was through the wall. I told her that was unfair, because the machine had character. She said it sounded like it had legal problems. I should not have smiled. I did anyway. Her phone lit up on the table before either of us could pretend the joke had made things normal. Graham's name appeared, disappeared, then appeared again with a message preview long enough for me to catch the words "We need to talk before this gets worse." Nora turned the phone face down with 2 fingers, careful, almost formal, like she was laying a bad memory to rest. I asked if she wanted me to call someone, maybe a friend, maybe her sister if she had one, maybe anyone who actually knew what to say to a woman still wearing an engagement dress after her fiancé had publicly misplaced his certainty. Nora looked at the closed door, then at the dark window over my sink, then at me. For the first time all night, her composure cracked just enough for the fear underneath to show. She said she did not want Graham called, did not want her mother called, did not want to go back to her own apartment where every flower sample, guest list, and half-packed wedding favor would be waiting like evidence. Then she looked me straight in the eye and said, "Stay with me tonight." I had heard intimate things for a living. People sent me recordings at 2 a.m. saying what they could not say to the person sleeping beside them. I knew the weight of a pause, the difference between wanting help and wanting witness, the tiny shift in a voice when someone was asking for more than the words aloud. Still, nothing in my headphones had ever hit me the way Nora's voice did in my kitchen. I did not move closer. I did not trust myself to. I just nodded and told her she could stay as long as she needed, and I would take the couch, and nothing had to be decided tonight. She watched me say all of that with an expression I could not read, except for one thing. Disappointment, maybe. Not because I was being kind, but because I was already trying to make myself harmless. When I finally asked why she had come to me, Nora touched the edge of the blue mug I had placed in front of her and said quietly that I was the only person in the building who had never looked at her like she was supposed to be a bride. I put the blue mug in front of Nora because it was the least chipped one I owned, not because I expected her to remember it. That was what I told myself, anyway. The truth was I had reached for it without thinking, the same way I had reached for a towel the night she came home, soaked from a client meeting, and found herself locked out with 2 boxes of handmade place cards balanced against her hip. That had been months ago, back when Graham was only a voice on speakerphone, asking why she had not called building management instead of bothering a neighbor. Nora had stood in my doorway dripping rain onto my mat and apologizing like weather was a personal failure, and I had handed her that same blue mug full of tea because coffee after 10 made her talk too fast and then stare at the ceiling until 3. She had mentioned that once in an elevator, half laughing, not even to me exactly, just into the tired space between us. I remembered it because apparently my brain had chosen Nora Whitaker as a storage unit for details I had no right to keep. She wrapped both hands around the mug but did not drink. The ring was still on her finger, bright and cold looking, and for a while she kept turning it with her thumb like she was trying to loosen a screw that had been tightened too long. I stood by the counter and pretended to give her space while doing useless things, rinsing a spoon, wiping a clean spot on the counter, moving my headphones from one side of the table to the other. Nora watched all of it with the kind of tired attention people get when they have been surrounded by noise and suddenly land somewhere quiet. She asked if I always cleaned when I was uncomfortable, and I told her I also reorganized cables and gave emotionally avoidant pep talks to houseplants, depending on the severity of the crisis. She almost smiled again. Then she looked at the mug and said she remembered this one. When I said it was just a mug, she shook her head slightly and told me it was the one I gave her when she was locked out, the one with the tiny crack near the handle. I said I was impressed she noticed the crack. Nora looked up and said she was more impressed that I remembered she could not sleep after late coffee. That should not have landed the way it did. It was a small thing, embarrassingly small, the kind of detail a decent neighbor could remember without turning it into a confession. But the room shifted anyway. Nora's eyes were glossy now, not with a dramatic flood of tears, just that thin shine people get when kindness arrives in the wrong place and proves something painful. She told me Graham had forgotten she hated lilies. Not disliked, hated. She was allergic enough that her throat got scratchy if she stayed around them too long, and yet somehow the engagement party had been full of white lilies because his mother thought they photographed beautifully. Nora had corrected it twice during planning, then stopped correcting it because everyone had already decided white lilies meant tasteful. She gave a small, bitter laugh and said that was probably the whole relationship in one flower arrangement. I leaned back against the counter and wanted to say something cruel about Graham, something satisfying, something that would put a dent in his perfect jaw from across the city. Instead, I asked if she had told him tonight. Nora's mouth twisted as she said she had tried. But Graham was very good at making her feel like the problem was not being hurt, but bringing up the hurt at an inconvenient time. Her phone kept lighting up, first Graham, then someone named Mom, then 3 messages from a group chat with a title full of ring emojis that made Nora close her eyes. She did not answer any of them. I asked if she wanted me to put the phone in another room, and she said no, because if she stopped seeing it, she might start imagining worse things. That sounded familiar to me. After my marriage ended, I used to leave my phone face up for weeks, waiting for a message I knew would not come and dreading it at the same time. My ex-wife Dana had not been cruel in the obvious ways. She had just looked at me one morning over cereal and said she thought she had mistaken safe for love. I never told Nora that. Not then. But I felt the old sentence move under my ribs while Nora stared at her engagement ring like safety had betrayed her too. She said Graham had not shouted, had not cheated in some dramatic way she could throw at him like a glass. He had simply stood beside her in a room full of people and admitted he was not sure, and somehow everyone had looked at her as if her job was to make his uncertainty easier to survive. I told her she did not have to make anything easier tonight. She looked at me for a long moment, and I could tell she heard more than I meant to say. That was the problem with Nora. She noticed the words people swallowed. She asked if I had ever wanted to say something to her and stopped myself. I laughed too quickly and said neighbors should stop themselves from saying many things, especially in buildings with thin walls and shared mail rooms. Nora did not laugh. She slid the ring off her finger at last and set it beside the mug. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just quietly enough to make my chest hurt. Then she leaned back in the chair, still wrapped around that blue mug like it was warmer than it was, and said, "Please don't lie to me tonight." Nora asked me not to lie, and for a few seconds the apartment became too honest for both of us. The old refrigerator hummed. Rain tapped lightly against the window over the sink. Somewhere down the hall, the elevator doors groaned open and closed, carrying somebody else home from a normal night, which felt almost insulting. I looked at the ring beside the blue mug, then at Nora's bare finger, and I knew there were about 100 things a good man should say in that moment. He should tell her she was in shock. He should tell her tomorrow would be clearer. He should tell her not to measure her whole life by one ugly party and one coward in a tailored suit. Instead, what I wanted to say was that I had noticed her for months, that I knew the difference between her real laugh and the one she used when Graham was around, that some nights when I heard her keys in the hall, I waited an extra second before closing my laptop just in case she knocked for sugar, tape, scissors, anything. That was not a neighborly confession. That was a man standing too close to a line. So I did what I usually did when truth got near me. I made myself useful. I told her she could not sleep in that dress, not because it was inappropriate, but because it looked like it had been designed by someone who hated breathing. Nora looked down at herself, as if she had forgotten she was still wearing it. The dress was beautiful in the expensive, quiet way, fitted at the waist, soft at the shoulders, the kind of dress meant to receive compliments from aunts and photographs from people who loved centerpieces. On my kitchen chair, under the buzzing light, it looked less like celebration and more like a costume she had outgrown in one night. I went to my room, found a clean hoodie and a pair of drawstring sleep pants that would probably swallow her whole, and brought them back with my eyes carefully aimed at the floor like I was delivering evidence to a courtroom. I told her the bathroom was hers and that I would find extra blankets for the couch. Nora took the clothes, but she did not move right away. She just looked at the hoodie in her hands, then at me, and said I was doing it again. I asked what it was, even though part of me already knew. Nora's mouth softened, not into a smile exactly, more like disappointment wearing kindness. She said I always turned away the second something got real. I tried to joke that I was being respectful, and she said she knew the difference between respect and disappearance. That shut me up. She stood there in my kitchen with her engagement dress, still catching the light, holding my old gray hoodie against her chest like it was either clothing or a question. Then she said she was not asking me to do anything wrong. She was not asking me to touch what was broken just because it was broken. She only needed me not to look at her like Graham's doubt had made her untouchable. I felt that one lower than I wanted to admit. There was a strange cruelty in being the safe man, the decent man, the man women trusted when another man had made a mess. People praised that kind of man until he started wanting something. Then, suddenly, his wanting looked like a betrayal of the role he had been assigned. I told Nora she was not untouchable, and the silence after that sentence made me wish I had chosen literally any other wording in the English language. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for one dangerous second, the whole room seemed to lean forward. She had been beautiful in the hallway, but standing in my kitchen with hurt under her composure and anger finally warming her voice, she was something worse than beautiful. She was real. I could see the tiny red mark near her collarbone where some necklace clasp had irritated her skin, the faint tremble she kept hiding by tightening her fingers around the hoodie, the way she was still trying to stand straight, because falling apart felt too much like giving Graham the final word. I wanted to step closer. I wanted to take the clothes from her hands, set them down, and tell her that if no one else had known how lucky they were to be chosen by her, that was not proof she was hard to love. It was proof they had been careless with something rare. Instead, I stayed by the counter, because wanting to comfort someone and wanting them were two different fires, and only a fool pretended he could not feel the heat from both. Nora went into the bathroom, and I used the 3 minutes she was gone to wage a quiet war with myself and lose on every front. I unfolded the couch, found the blanket that did not smell like storage, moved my laptop and headphones into the corner, and told myself this was simple. A neighbor needed a safe place. That was all. Then the bathroom door opened, and Nora stepped out wearing my hoodie with the sleeves pulled over her hands and the sleep pants rolled twice at the waist. And every simple thing in the apartment immediately got complicated. She looked smaller without the dress, but not weaker. More like she had removed armor and was deciding whether the person underneath still belonged to her. I turned toward the couch too quickly, and she noticed. Of course she noticed. Nora said my name softly, not as a warning, not as a plea, just enough to stop me from hiding inside blanket logistics. When I faced her again, she told me she did not want pity. She had received plenty of that tonight from people who looked at her like a centerpiece had fallen over. What she wanted was one person who could stay without making her feel like a problem to solve. I said I could do that. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Nora studied me in the low kitchen light and asked if I was sure, because I had spent the entire night acting like kindness was the only thing I was allowed to offer her. I told her kindness was not a small thing. She agreed, but said it was not the whole thing either. Her phone buzzed again, hard against the table this time, and we both looked at it. Graham had sent another message. "We need to talk before people misunderstand where you went." Nora read it once, and something in her face changed from wounded to tired in a sharper way. She said he was already turning her absence into something she had to defend. I offered to sit in the hall if that made it easier for her to say she had been alone, and Nora looked at me like I had finally hurt her without meaning to. She said when Graham stood there in front of everyone and admitted he needed time to be sure, the terrible part was not that she wanted to run after him. The terrible part was that she did not. She thought of my door first, my ugly coffee machine, my quiet kitchen, my voice asking if she was okay like the answer mattered. Then she whispered that realizing that had scared her more than being left in front of both families. I did not know what to do with a confession like that, so I let the room hold it for a while. There are sentences people say when they are tired that you can excuse in the morning, and there are sentences that arrive tired because they have been carrying themselves for too long. Nora's belonged to the second kind. She stood near my kitchen table in my hoodie, with Graham's messages lighting up beside her ring, and told me she had thought of my door before she thought of the man she was supposed to marry. I wanted to believe that meant what my heart immediately wanted it to mean. I also knew wanting could make a man stupid, and I had worked too hard to become the kind of man who did not take advantage of someone else's broken night. So I nodded like my pulse was not doing something ridiculous, and told her she did not have to explain anything else, unless saying it helped. Nora looked at me for a long second, then sank down onto the rug beside the couch instead of taking the chair, as if sitting on the floor made it easier to stop performing adulthood. I sat on the opposite end of the couch, not close enough to crowd her, not far enough to make her feel abandoned. The apartment had gone quiet except for the rain and the occasional hiss from the radiator by the window. Nora pulled the hoodie sleeves over her hands and started talking in the slow, careful way people talk when they are finally telling the truth in the order it hurts. The party had been at Graham's parents' house, a glass and stone place on the lake where every surface reflected candlelight, and nobody raised their voice because anger was considered poor taste. There had been champagne, white lilies everywhere despite what she had told them, and a framed mock-up of the wedding invitation she had designed herself, displayed near the dessert table like proof she was talented enough to decorate her own surrender. She said Graham had been charming at first, moving from guest to guest with his hand at her waist, laughing at his father's jokes, accepting congratulations with the ease of a man who had never wondered whether a room would approve of him. Then Elise arrived. Nora said Elise's name without bitterness, which somehow made the story worse. Elise was not the villain in a red dress, not some dramatic ex crashing through the doors with proof and perfume. She was Graham's old almost, the woman his family always described as complicated, which Nora had learned was rich people language for unfinished. Elise came late, hugged Graham too long, and said she hoped it was not strange that she wanted to wish them well. Nora had watched Graham's hand leave her back. That was the first thing she noticed. Not the hug, not the whispers, not the way his mother suddenly became very interested in rearranging champagne glasses. Just the absence of his hand, that small withdrawal from her body before his words ever caught up. I listened without interrupting, because I could tell she had been interrupted all night by people who wanted her pain to become manageable before they were forced to witness it. She said she pulled Graham aside near the hallway that led to the guest bath and asked him, very quietly, if there was something he needed to tell her. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He said he had been under pressure, that seeing Elise had brought up old feelings, that marriage was serious, that maybe needing time was not the same as not loving her. Nora laughed once when she repeated that, but there was nothing funny in it. She said what destroyed her was not even the uncertainty. It was how quickly everyone around them became concerned with containing it. Graham's mother told her not to make a scene. Her own mother told her to breathe before she said something permanent. Graham looked relieved that other people were helping him turn his doubt into her responsibility. And Nora, who designed invitations with thick paper and perfect spacing, who knew exactly how to make a promise look centered on a page, stood there realizing the man beside her could not center her in a room full of witnesses. The radiator clicked, and Nora glanced toward my kitchen like she needed somewhere less painful to rest her eyes. She looked at the coffee machine and said the ridiculous thing had probably been screaming through our shared wall the night she almost called off the wedding 3 weeks ago. I turned toward her, surprised, and she nodded like she had expected that reaction. She said they had been choosing final floral accents, and Graham had forgotten about the lilies again, not once, not casually, but after months of planning, after 2 corrections, after her throat had gone raw at a tasting because his mother insisted on having arrangements nearby. Nora had sat in the florist's studio and watched Graham approve white lilies because they looked clean, and something in her had gone so quiet she could hear her own future shrinking. That same night, she came home, passed me in the hall, and I had said without thinking that there was ginger tea in my cabinet if the flowers had made her throat bad again. I barely remembered saying it. Nora remembered every word. That was when she finally cried, but not the way people cry in movies. Her face did not collapse, she did not cover her mouth. One tear simply slipped down, and she looked annoyed by it, as if even grief had chosen poor timing. She told me the worst part of tonight was not that Graham had embarrassed her, the worst part was the relief. When he said he needed time, some loyal, exhausted part of her did not break. It breathed. She hated herself for that for almost an hour, standing in a bathroom with 3 women, knocking gently on the door, and asking whether she was decent. Then she realized decent was exactly what she had been trying to be for everyone else. Decent daughter, decent fiancée, decent almost wife, decent woman who did not humiliate a man for hesitating at the edge of forever. She looked at me then and said she was tired of being decent if decent meant disappearing politely. Her mother's name lit up on the phone again, followed by a message preview that said, "Graham is coming to bring you home." Nora stared at it until the light went dark. I heard myself tell her that if he came here, I could step out, let them talk privately, make it easier for her to explain that nothing had happened. I meant it as protection. I meant it as proof that I could still be trusted with the line between us. But Nora turned her head slowly, and the look on her face made me wish I could take the words back before they finished breathing. She said my name in a way that made the whole apartment feel smaller. Then she told me that was the problem. I don't want you to leave. Morning did not arrive so much as seep in, gray and thin, turning the windows pale while the apartment still felt like midnight. Nora had not slept. Neither had I, though at some point we had both pretended for each other's benefit. She sat at my kitchen table with the blue mug between her hands, wearing my hoodie-like armor that had not been designed for battle, while I stood by the sink and watched the city wake up in wet reflections. There is a particular kind of silence that comes after a night of truth. It is not empty. It is crowded with everything that has been said and everything still waiting its turn. Nora's phone had finally stopped buzzing around 5, which somehow felt less peaceful than when it was ringing. I kept thinking about her mother's message. "Graham is coming to bring you home," and the way those words had landed in the room like a claim. Not check on you, not apologize, bring you home. As if Nora were a misplaced coat someone had left at the wrong apartment. At 7:18 someone knocked on my door, not soft like Nora had the night before. Controlled, certain. A knock that assumed the door was already halfway open because the person on the other side had decided it should be. Nora closed her eyes for 1 second, and I saw her shoulders lift on a breath she did not quite finish. I asked if she wanted me to ignore it. She shook her head, not because she wanted to face him, but because she was done letting other people decide where the conversation happened. I opened the door and found Graham Caldwell in the hallway wearing yesterday's suit with today's patience stretched thin over his face. He looked past me first, of course. Men like Graham do not ask permission to search a room with their eyes. When he saw Nora behind me, barefoot, hair loose now, my gray hoodie hanging nearly to her knees, something small and ugly moved across his expression before he smoothed it away. He said her name with relief polished over accusation and told her everyone was worried. Nora did not stand immediately. She looked at him over the rim of the mug and said that was generous, since most of them had spent the night worried about what people would think. Graham's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice low, probably because the building hallway had ears and he preferred audiences he could manage. He said this had gotten out of hand, that they needed to talk somewhere private, and then his eyes moved to me again. I was still holding the door, one hand on the edge, feeling like a bouncer at the saddest club in Seattle. He thanked me for giving Nora a place to calm down, which sounded polite until you heard the little blade inside calm down. Then he added that it would be best if he and his fiancée handled the rest as adults. I should have let Nora answer first. I knew that. Still, something in me reacted to the word fiancé like a bruise being pressed. Before I could say anything useful or stupid, Nora set the mug down. The small sound of ceramic against wood cut through the hallway better than shouting would have. She told Graham not to call her that right now. He blinked like she had corrected his grammar in public. Then he stepped closer to the threshold and said he understood she was hurt. But disappearing into another man's apartment after their engagement party was not helping anyone. There it was. The turn. The gentle rearranging of the story until his hesitation became her recklessness. I felt it happen in real time. And worse, I felt my own instinct rise to protect her the way I knew how, by removing myself. I heard myself say that I could go downstairs, get coffee, give them the room if that made it easier for her. Even as I said it, I hated myself a little. Not because the offer was wrong, but because it was familiar. Safe men are very good at volunteering to become invisible. Nora stood up before Graham could accept on her behalf. The hoodie sleeves fell over her hands, and she pushed them back with a sharp little motion that made her look more awake than she had all night. She came to the doorway and stood beside me, not behind me. That mattered. I felt it before I understood it. Graham looked at her clothes again and made the mistake of letting his disappointment show. He said people would misunderstand this. Nora asked him which people, his parents, her mother, Elise, or him. His face changed at Elise's name, and for the first time since he arrived, the calm cracked. He said Elise had nothing to do with why he needed time. Nora gave a tired, almost gentle smile and said that was the problem. Elise did not have to do anything. Graham had only needed to see her to remember Nora was negotiable. He said she was being unfair. He said last night had been complicated. He said marriage was not something to enter lightly, as if Nora had been the one who turned forever into a committee meeting in front of 2 families and a dessert table. Then he looked at me and asked, quieter now, what exactly I was to her. It was a good question, and a cruel one, because every possible answer sounded either too small or too soon. Neighbor. Friend. Mistake. Refuge. The man whose hoodie she was wearing after the worst night of her life. I opened my mouth, then closed it, because for once I understood that answering for her would only build another room she had not chosen. Nora looked at Graham, but when she spoke, she said my name. She said I had not asked her to explain her pain in a way that made him comfortable. She said I had not touched her like she owed me softness for being sad. She said I had stayed, and somehow staying had become the one thing no one else knew how to do without turning it into ownership. Graham's face went pale with anger disguised as dignity. He told her she was confused, that last night had shaken her, that she should not make permanent decisions while embarrassed. Nora laughed once, and it was not the ruined little laugh from midnight. It had heat in it now. She said embarrassment was what she felt when everyone watched her try to protect a man who would not protect her back. This was something else. Then she turned to me, and the hallway, Graham, the rain, all of it seemed to pull back from the edge of her voice. You were never my escape, Miles. You were the first place I didn't have to disappear. I could not speak. It was not that I did not have words. It was that every defense I had spent years building had been designed for rejection, not for being chosen clearly in bad lighting, in an old hallway, by a woman wearing my hoodie and no longer apologizing for wanting air. Graham said her name again, but it had lost its handle. Nora turned back to him and told him she would return the ring when she was ready, not as a performance, not through his mother, and not today. She said they were done, and if he needed a story to tell people, he could start with the truth. He had asked for time, and she had finally decided not to give him any more of hers. After he left, the hallway stayed quiet for several seconds, like even the building was waiting to see whether Nora would fall apart. She did not. She closed the door, leaned back against it, and pressed both hands over her face. I wanted to go to her, but I waited because waiting had become the only honest thing I knew how to offer. When she lowered her hands, her eyes were wet, but steady. I told her she did not have to know what came next. She nodded, then said she knew one thing. She did not want me to be a decision made in the wreckage of a terrible night. She wanted me to be something she could still choose when the sun was up, when the dress was gone, when no one was watching, and when she had nothing left to run from. For the next few weeks, Nora and I became very careful people. That might not sound romantic, but at 34, after you have watched enough good things get ruined by bad timing, careful starts to look like respect. She went back to her apartment that afternoon, with my hoodie folded in her arms, and her engagement ring, in a small envelope she had labeled in her neat designer handwriting, because even heartbreak looked organized when Nora touched it. I did not follow her. I did not ask where we stood. I did not turn one night of honesty into a claim. Instead, I went back to work, edited other people's apologies, balanced other people's silences, and tried not to listen too hard for her footsteps in the hall. Sometimes I heard her door open and close. Sometimes we passed each other by the mailboxes, and she would smile like there was a whole conversation standing quietly between us, waiting for the right time to speak. She ended things with Graham properly, which meant painfully. She returned the ring through a courier at first, then changed her mind, met him in daylight at a cafe with windows on every side, and gave it back herself because she said she was tired of letting other people carry the hard parts of her life. His family called it unfortunate. Her mother called it impulsive. Nora called it overdue. She canceled the venue, the flowers, the menu tasting, the photographer, and finally the invitation order, which was the one that made her quiet for 2 days. Not because she wanted the wedding back, but because those invitations had her hands all over them. Cream paper, charcoal ink, a little pressed fern in the corner, every line spaced with the kind of care Graham had never given the woman whose name sat beside his. When she told me that in the hallway one evening, I asked if she was okay. and she gave me a look that said I was still asking simple questions with complicated answers. Then she said she was getting there, and for once, I believed her. I kept my distance because I thought that was what a decent man did. Nora eventually called me on it. It happened on a Thursday night, almost 3 weeks after she had first knocked on my door. I was at my kitchen table again, headphones around my neck, my terrible coffee machine making its usual dying harbor noises, when the knock came. This time, it was not broken. It was not desperate. It was 2 firm taps, then a pause, like she wanted me to know she was choosing the door instead of falling against it. When I opened it, Nora stood there in jeans, a soft green sweater, and no ring mark that I could see, holding a brown paper bag against her chest. Her hair was loose. Her eyes were clear. She looked tired in a human way, not destroyed in a ceremonial one. She lifted the bag and said she had brought coffee beans for my machine, because if she was going to keep hearing that poor appliance through the wall, it deserved better material to suffer with. I should have made a joke immediately. That was my usual defense, and there was an easy one waiting. Instead, I stepped aside and let her in without pretending I had not been hoping she would come. She moved through my apartment differently this time. The first night, she had entered like someone crossing into shelter during a storm. Now she came in like someone visiting a place she had already decided mattered. She set the coffee on the counter, touched the blue mug on the drying rack, and smiled to herself. I asked if this was a rescue mission for my kitchen equipment, and she said no, not exactly. Then she turned around and looked at me with that dangerous honesty I had learned to fear and want in equal measure. She said she did not need me to save her tonight. She did not need a witness, a hiding place, or a man willing to sleep on his own couch to prove he was safe. She just wanted to know if I would have dinner with her, somewhere with bad lighting and no family opinions, as a man who was allowed to know he had been chosen. There are moments when life gives you the same doorway twice. The first time, Nora had come to me because everything behind her had collapsed. The second time, she came because she could stand on her own and still wanted to cross the hall. That difference mattered. I told her yes before fear could dress itself up as patience. She smiled, and something in me that had been braced since my ex-wife called me safe but not loved finally loosened. We did not kiss dramatically against the counter. We did not pretend the weeks had fixed everything. We made coffee too late, ignored the fact that neither of us should drink it, and sat at my kitchen table while the machine groaned like it objected to being part of a love story. Nora laughed, really laughed, and I did not look away this time. That was how it started for real. Not with an engagement party, not with a perfect dress, not with a man making a promise he was not sure he could keep. It started in my small kitchen, with rain on the window, coffee too strong for midnight, and a woman who had once asked me to stay because she was falling apart, then came back later because she wanted to begin. Sometimes love is not the person who makes your life look impressive from the outside. Sometimes it is the person who sees you in the worst light of your life and still does not ask you to disappear. So tell me this. Have you ever realized the person who made you feel most like yourself was not the one everyone expected you to choose? And if you were in my place that night, would you have stayed? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, like, subscribe, and come back for the next one.